When poring over old case files, you'll start seeing the same names over and over eventually, and I've noticed this particular blue and yellow logo has popped up more than its fair share. If you then dig a little deeper, you'll exhume the fantastical and well-loved Darkstalkers franchise, something Capcom is now relegated to costume packs and cameos, which it should count its lucky stars for, instead of being, these guys. Darkstalkers was once considered their second biggest all-original fighting game franchise, having seen several sequels, merchandise, manga, comics, anime, and other adaptations to its credit.
Welcome back to the world of the weird. I'm your host, Lily LeMay, and we're chatting with my guest, Morrigan Anslade, a succubus, and we're talking about evil.
But it has since slowed down. Way down. But why is that? Capcom has resurrected a good amount of its older IPs and even other fighting games, but these ghouls and ghosties of the night have yet to rise from their coffins, not having seen any sort of re-release for the last 6 years, and not seeing a completely new release for the last 21. Jesus Christ, how long have I been doing this? But wait, I know what you're thinking. I thought Darkstalkers were not dead. Wasn't there a new game coming or something? Well, fellow gumshoes, that's the question we're going to answer. This is the case of the missing Midnight Monsters. In the early 90s, Capcom unleashed their revolutionary CPS2 arcade board, which allowed for more fluid animation, massive sprites, and additional effects. And while their first full game to take advantage of the technology was Children of the Atom, allowing the player to beat up Cyclops in a variety of ways, Darkstalkers was their first all-original, non-licensed fighting title to be running on the board outside of Super Turbo. And hot damn did they ever take advantage of it. Bulging limbs, falling sarcophagi, legs turning into chainsaws, packs of cat girls, and beings made of pure cosmic hellfire, and all manner of things that went bump in the night. What followed were two fantastic sequels that added even more features and characters in the traditional Capcom style. Then for a long time, nothing happened. It was as silent as the grave until 2005, where the franchise was kinda brought back with not one, but two re-releases. The Sony PSP received Darkstalkers The Chaos Tower, which, despite the fancy schmancy subtitle, was a repackage of the trilogy. It was its own game, you simply choose which, for lack of a better term, the groove of which monster you wanted to play as. Darkstalkers 1 Rikuyo versus Night Warriors Rikuyo? Yeah, you can do that, and really, who could resist?
Even though you are curiously attractive for a scaly freak.
The PS2 received Vampire, the Darkstalkers collection, which was a more straightforward package of the 5 games in the series, including the Japanese versions. Now, this particular collection never saw the light of the moon outside Japan, and to this day has remained a rare import. Then, for a long time, nothing happened. Again. Now, those two re-releases are important, as they are, in a weird roundabout way, the linchpins to this entire story. In 2010, 5 years later, Capcom was set to announce a brand new fighting game, and with Marvel vs. Capcom 3, Fate of the Bad logo, already being revealed earlier that year, fans have been chomping at the bit in anticipation for a brand new Darkstalkers title. I mean, what could it else be, Cross-Tekken? So yes, if you were a fan of vampires, undead samurai, and sexy cat dames, your dark wishes were denied, and Capcom went silent once more. Now, it's true that various other Night Warriors, only really Morgan and Felicia, and maybe there was one other, they popped up in other games, but that was about it. It seemed that these mighty monsters would be joining that massive stable of Capcom franchises that would most likely never get another shot at the big time. Not too long after Cross-Tekken's debut, internally, within Capcom there are whispers, barely heard on the night wind, that they were considering doing something with those that stalk the dark. Fans would constantly question Yoshinori Ono about the possibility of a new game, who, for his part, would reply with a coy smile. This was the man who almost single-handedly brought back Street Fighter, so surely he could do the same for Felicia and Morgan and all the others, I guess. The news that blood was potentially pumping through the dead body of the franchise reached the ears of Udon Entertainment, who had a long working relationship with Capcom, having made comics and games based on their properties for years. Udon's director of publishing, Matt Moylan, revealed that they decided to pounce on this opportunity. In 2011, we learned of a project in development at Capcom involving Darkstalkers. Having done Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo HD Remix, we took it on ourselves to pitch the same idea for Darkstalkers, to redraw the sprites in higher resolution. So we brought the idea to producer Yoshinori Ono, but were turned down without much feedback. In one way, I understand, because it would have been much more daunting than Street Fighter 2. At the same time, it probably would have looked even better than HD Remix, since the characters are so well animated to begin with. So, wait a minute, in 2011, Udon heard that Capcom had a project in development. Which project would that be? Well, Ono did drop a hint to fans, as he does, at Comic-Con 2011, telling fans that Darkstalkers are not dead, and took a picture of the audience holding up their own money as a way to let Capcom know that fans want a thing. Teases and hints continued for almost a whole more year. It was then at the 2012 NYC Comic-Con when an elaborate trailer was shown to fans that, to many, confirmed a brand new title was in the works. Just looking at this grainy, handheld footage, you can see some actual moolah was thrown at this thing, but not enough moolah for Capcom to actually put a direct feed video version online. Anywhere. Curious. You know, it really is rather strange. Imagine if, say, Sega showed a big elaborate trailer for a new Virtua Fighter at a live event, but then never showed it again. They would actually do that. Regardless, Darkstalkers Resurrection for the PS3 and the Xbox 360 was announced shortly after that trailer, and if you happened to be in that room, you might have heard a collective deflating sigh, because it was a third Darkstalkers re-release that repackaged the old games rather than, be a new one. It's really rather bittersweet, because Resurrection was another in a long line of outstanding HD ports that Iron Galaxy, who also did Marvel Origins and Third Strike HD, were handling. Galleries filled with content, in-game achievements, filters, rollback netcode, and a stellar presentation. The problem, of course, was that this was one of the dreaded Capcom tests, which was a moniker that carried negative connotations around that time. Capcom would release things that people didn't necessarily want or need, but it was a test to see if they'd vote with their dollars, and more often than not, they would learn the wrong lessons from it. Will you kids who own a Wii buy a port of Resident Evil 4, a 2-year-old game? Oh, you will! Holy crackers, well, curl that finger on that monkey's paw, cause here's Umbrella Chronicles! Oh, that sold like almost 2 million copies. Well, here's Darkside Chronicles! It's not really what the fans wanted.
That's not what I want!
This was simply the time frame where the Capcom test felt many a comeback for many of their franchises. In this instance, though, they were transparent with the intention of Darkstalkers Resurrection. In this instance, though, they were transparent with the intention of Darkstalkers Resurrection, with many employees, Ono most notably, saying up front that if Resurrection sells well, then fans would get what they wanted. Unfortunately, Darkstalkers always lagged behind Street Fighter in popularity, and the Versus Fighters too, even in its heyday, so charging money for 20-year-old games was not the best indicator of popularity, especially when it had been done 2 times previous. Thus, Capcom was not beating around the bush, and was quick to let fans know that the full Resurrection was going to be cancelled. Then Capcom's senior vice president on the old Unity forums explained when asked about the HD Darkstalkers placing high in monthly digital sales on the PlayStation Store with this. Sadly, it's not as high on that list as it really needs to be successful. I'm disappointed in the opening sales response relative to any other fighting title we've put out on the same platforms, given the frequency and urgency of requests we've had here over the last several years, and the quality of the execution. It is the most fully featured and probably best project of this type that we've done. That's because fans wanted a new game with polygonal Street Fighter IV graphics and over-the-top action, not another digital collection, of which Capcom is releasing almost every other month. But then, why the big elaborate CG trailer? It wasn't even included as a bonus in the galleries or used as an intro. Why turn down the HD remix from Udon? It kinda almost seemed like Ono wanted to get more ambitious, but was told to hold his undead horses, as the Capcom test needed to be trotted out first. Was a fully original, brand new Darkstalkers game in the planning stages at some point, but then was quickly halted in favor of a cheaper release? I don't know, but my gut says maybe. Years later, the former head of Capcom brand marketing and esports, Matt Dahlgren, threw further dirt on the grave of the franchise when he said there was nothing Darkstalkers on the immediate horizon for sure, which was something also shared by Ono himself. My apologies, we won't be releasing a new installment in the Darkstalkers series anytime soon, as we didn't manage to hit our sales targets for Darkstalkers Resurrection. A picture begins to form here. While Street Fighter IV and its many versions proved to be a big hit, it's very possible the failure of Cross Tekken and the sluggish sales of Resurrection was the 1-2 chain combo that convinced Capcom they needed to hold back on their fighting game output going forward. To risk even more on a fully fledged Darkstalkers title was probably seen as too risky of a venture. It's been 6 years since Resurrection, and it's currently still locked on the Xbox 360 and PS3, not even getting backwards compatibility on current consoles or even a PC version, with zero indication that'll ever change. So, much like Power Stone, Rival Schools, or Final Fight, or Tech Romancer, Cyberbots, or Star Gladiator, it's sadly safe to say that the Night Warriors will be forever destined to remain as silly Street Fighter costumes, versus game slots, or Tekken cards. And thus the case of the missing Midnight Monsters is closed. Know of any other cases we can get down and dirty with? Post them up in the comments below, or slip into the offices of our Patreon to nominate a case you want to see. Thanks again to our fellow Gumshoe Unnamed Bird Versus for nominating this episode. And with that, we'll see you next time on the Flophouse Files.